I didn't believe Slack would matter when I first saw it. And that reaction wasn't ignorance. It was experience talking, because I had already lived through enough enterprise tools to know how hard it is to change the way people communicate at work. Email was entrenched. Meetings were sacred. Chat tools existed and were mostly ignored. From the outside, Slack looked like another nice interface, trying to soften a problem that was cultural, not technical. What I didn't understand then, and what makes Slack's story worth studying now, is that Slack didn't try to fix communication by making it more efficient. It fixed it by making it more human. And that distinction is what allowed it to quietly take over workplaces without ever forcing anyone to use it. Slack did not start as a productivity product. That detail explains almost everything. Stuart Butterfield and his team were not trying to reinvent work. They were trying to save a failing game company. Tiny Speck was building an online game called Glitch, and like many ambitious creative projects, it struggled. What didn't struggle was the internal tool the team built to talk to each other. They needed fast feedback context history and a way to collaborate across time zones without drowning in email threads. So they hacked together a system that felt more like a shared room than a pipeline of messages. When Glitch failed, Butterfield did something most founders resist with every ounce of ego they have. He admitted that the side tool was more valuable than the product they had fallen in love with. That decision already put Slack in a different category. Slack was born from letting go, not from doubling down. The founders didn't romanticize the game's potential. They paid attention to where real value was emerging organically. Slack wasn't invented through a grand vision of the future of work. It was discovered through necessity, shaped by people who were actively using it to survive chaos. Tools built under real pressure carry a different kind of honesty. They solve felt problems, not imagined ones. Email was the enemy Slack never explicitly attacked, but everything in Slack's design quietly undermined it. Channels replaced inboxes. Conversations were organized by topic instead of hierarchy. History was searchable. Decisions were visible. Most importantly, Slack assumed that work is messy and social not linear and formal. That assumption sounds obvious until you realize how many workplace tools are designed as if humans were robots, passing tickets to each other. Slack treated communication as something living, contextual, and emotional, and then wrapped it in an interface that felt friendly instead of bureaucratic. The genius wasn't just the product, it was the positioning. Slack didn't sell itself as software, it sold itself as relief. Relief from overflowing inboxes, relief from missed context, relief from feeling out of the loop. Even the name mattered. Slack sounded almost rebellious in a culture obsessed with busyness. It hinted that maybe work didn't have to feel like constant tension. That subtle emotional framing lowered resistance. People didn't feel like Slack was imposed on them. They felt like they were discovering it. Slack also understood something critical about adoption. Tools don't spread because executives mandate them. They spread because teams pull them in. Slack was bottom-up by design. Freemium wasn't just a pricing strategy. It was a distribution philosophy. Let small teams try it without permission. Let them feel the difference. Let habits form. By the time leadership noticed, Slack was already embedded in daily work. Replacing it would have felt like ripping out a shared memory, not just uninstalling software. Another overlooked part of Slack's rise is tone. Most enterprise software speaks in commands and features. Slack spoke like a human. Copy was playful. Errors were gentle. Notifications felt conversational instead of alarmist. This wasn't decoration. It was trust building. When a tool talks to you like a colleague instead of a system, you're more forgiving, more patient, and more likely to engage. Slack didn't just move messages faster. It made people feel less stupid and less alone while working. Integration was the final lever that turned Slack from a chat app into infrastructure. Slack didn't try to do everything itself. It became the place where everything else talked. GitHub, Jira, Google Docs, CI systems, alerts all flowing into channels where humans already were. Work stopped being scattered across dashboards and became visible in one shared stream. This visibility changed behavior. Decisions happened faster. Accountability increased. Not because Slack enforced it, but because silence became noticeable. When work is public, coordination improves naturally. But what really separated Slack from dozens of competitors was restraint. Slack resisted turning itself into a project manager, a CRM, or a full operating system. It focused obsessively on communication and context. That focus kept the product light enough to feel invisible while being powerful enough to become essential. Many tools try to increase value by adding features. Slack increased value by becoming the connective tissue between existing tools and people. By the time large enterprises started adopting Slack officially, the behavior shift had already happened. Meetings shortened. Email volume dropped. New hires onboarded faster because institutional memory lived in channels instead of individuals' inboxes. Slack didn't force transparency, it normalized it. And once transparency becomes normal, going back to siloed communication feels regressive. Of course, this power came with consequences. Always-on communication blurred boundaries. Notifications followed people home. The same immediacy that sped up collaboration also increased pressure to respond. Slack didn't create that tension, but it amplified it. Any tool that accelerates communication accelerates stress if culture doesn't adapt alongside it. Slack's success exposed the truth that tools can't fix broken expectations about availability and urgency. They can only reveal them. And this is where Slack's story becomes more complex than a simple great product wins narrative. Because once you become the central nervous system of work, you inherit responsibility for how work feels, how attention is fragmented, and how power flows through communication. And the moment Slack crossed from helpful tool into workplace infrastructure, the question shifted from how it would grow to how it would be used and misused at scale. As the sentence continues into the next phase, where dominance brings gravity, and the real cost of owning workplace communication begins to surface, where dominance stopped feeling like growth and started feeling like gravity. Because once Slack became the default layer of workplace communication, it could no longer pretend it was just a neutral tool. It had become an environment. And environments shape behavior, whether their creators intended or not. This is the phase every infrastructure company reaches when success forces a reckoning. You are no longer helping teams talk. You are influencing how power, urgency, and attention move inside organizations. The first tension was speed. Slack made communication effortless, and effortless communication tends to expand until it fills every available moment. Messages multiplied, channels proliferated, context improved, but noise crept in quietly. What once felt liberating began to feel overwhelming for teams that never recalibrated expectations. Slack didn't create bad management, but it exposed it brutally. Leaders who equated visibility with productivity flooded channels. Urgency became ambient. The green dot turned into a silent demand. Slack revealed an old truth in a new way. Tools amplify culture, they don't correct it. This put Slack in an uncomfortable position. If it pushed too hard on norms, it would be accused of telling companies how to work. If it stayed silent, it would be blamed for burnout. The company chose a middle path that few users notice consciously, but feel subconsciously. Features like Do Not Disturb status indicators, scheduled messages, and later async-friendly improvements weren't just conveniences. They were guardrails. Slack was quietly teaching teams that not every message is urgent, that presence doesn't equal availability, and that healthy communication requires pauses. This is rare. Most tools optimize for engagement. Slack began optimizing for sustainability, even when it didn't obviously increase usage. Another test came with scale and enterprise adoption. The same bottom-up magic that fueled Slack's rise now had to coexist with compliant security and governance. Large organizations don't just want tools that feel good. They want tools they can control. Slack had to grow up without becoming soulless. It layered enterprise features carefully, trying not to crush the friendliness that made people trust it in the first place. Many companies fail here. They bifurcate into fun startup tool and corporate version. Slack fought to remain one product, stretched but recognizable. The acquisition by Salesforce marked another inflection point. From the outside, it looked like an exit. From the inside, it was an admission of reality. Competing as independent infrastructure against giants required allies. Slack wasn't selling out its mission. It was anchoring it inside a larger system that could help it survive the next decade of platform wars. Just like Instagram, WhatsApp, and others before it, Slack had to trade some autonomy for longevity. The real question became whether its original human-centered philosophy could survive inside a much larger enterprise organism. What Slack's journey ultimately teaches is that becoming the king of workplace communication is less about features and more about restraint. Slack won because it didn't tell people how to work. It made existing work visible and easier. Its ongoing challenge is resisting the temptation to optimize for noise instead of clarity. The companies that use Slack, well, don't use it more. They use it more intentionally. That difference determines whether Slack feels like a lifesaver or a stress amplifier. For builders, Slack offers a subtle but powerful lesson. The most dangerous moment is not when nobody uses your product. It's when everyone does. At that point, every design decision becomes cultural policy. Every default becomes a norm. Slack's early genius was empathy for how people actually communicate. Its long-term survival depends on preserving that empathy, even as scale demands structure monetization and integration into larger systems. Slack did not become the workplace communication king by shouting louder than email. It became king by listening better to how people already talked, then giving them a place to do it together with less friction and more humanity. The unfinished work is making sure that humanity doesn't get lost once the tool becomes unavoidable. And if this story of Slack's rise and responsibility resonated with you, stay with this channel. Subscribe, because this is where we go beyond product success and talk about what happens when tools become environments. And leave a comment sharing whether Slack has made your work life better, worse, or simply faster, because those answers say less about Slack itself and more about the cultures we're all building inside it.